Welcome to the Fusionary Health Podcast. Today I have Kim Marrone with me. She is an acupuncturist in Delray. She is a functional medicine practitioner, and I am her client. I am one person who goes to her, and I went to her because to me, to have a functional medicine team who has different vantage points to your health, almost like a boardroom for your health, is very important. Even though I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, even though I'm into supplements and herbs and all these things at the level I am, I still wanted your perspective on everything, your insight, your knowledge base on the different testing, the importance, and really connecting the dots when it came to my health. And I send so many clients your way because I love your style. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy you're doing this.
Yeah, thank you. I am always seeking practitioners like you who are coming at our health from different perspectives. So will you share your background? Because, acupuncture, functional medicine, Chinese medicine, really your whole aura when it comes to health is very, zen, very calm, very grounding, and coming from this vantage point of how do we optimize ourselves, but keeping it in check. Like, we don't have to go nuts with the project. So will you share your background and then we'll dive in?
Yeah. So my background in health care, originally I went to school for Chinese medicine and got my master's in Chinese medicine. And one of the reasons I was so pulled to that was that the foundation of Chinese medicine was that we live in this natural world. We're a part of it. If we can somehow live according to the natural processes of the world, we're going to be healthier. Sure. And most of what I see as how our health has, improved in many areas, but also has really taken a plummet in other areas are really this separation between nature and ourselves. Sure. So as I started practicing after I got licensed and got my master's, I started being more introduced to what we call functional medicine and functional medicine testing, and kind of looking at things from the lens of better ability to test and technology. And what I realized was there was such a beautiful synchronicity between Chinese medicine and functional medicine because, as we have touched on in our conversations, is that Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, is functional medicine. It's root cause medicine. Not only looking at what is happening in the body from a system standpoint, but also what is happening in our life, what is happening in our family with our emotions, our spirit, our environment, how we are getting through the day in, day out. And so it was a perfect sort of, marriage of Chinese medicine, functional medicine. And then as the years went on, much more of an ability to blend those two modalities together.
Sure.
And in my everyday practice, it isn't really separate. If I'm treating patients with the modality of acupuncture, I'm incorporating all of the things that I know from a more sort of a Western functional medicine perspective.
Sure.
And it really is interesting because some of the things, for example, I had a patient come in, a gentleman, and usually when gentlemen come in, they want to focus on whatever the thing that they came in with for. And He was having some trigeminal neuralgia, and it wasn't painful, but it was really irritating. And as we started talking about him and his health, the things that he was mentioning, he had a lot of connective tissue issues and musculoskeletal issues. He had touched on that he had high liver enzymes, and and I was listening, and I said, that's really interesting because in Chinese medicine, the liver controls the eyes, the liver controls all of the connective tissue, the tendons, the ligaments, the cartilage. You're having like these sort of tremors in his eye, and the liver controls like movement. So tremors or lack of movement is all related to the liver. And Actually, and this was before I knew his liver enzymes were elevated, because I said, well, what's your blood work like? He's like, well, the only problem I have is cholesterol. I'm like, interesting, cholesterol's made in the liver. Yeah. And then I'm like, so your blood work looks good? He goes, well, I mean, everything, my liver enzymes are always elevated. And I was like, it was like a light bulb went up over my head. And I said, that's, to me, really interesting, because we can look at blood work and we can look at diagnostic testing that leads us to the same organ systems and the same systems as the Chinese medicine doctors knew 3,000 years ago.
Correct.
So treating him, I'm thinking about like liver. How do we support this gentleman's liver? Not from a, woo-woo standpoint, but all of your things that are happening with you are related to this organ and organ system. So the more that I studied Chinese medicine, the more that I studied functional medicine, I realized like, wow, this was in different language, but we're really looking at the same things.
Correct. I see that from the Ayurvedic perspective all the time. I really think, just like Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine have so much in common. The meridian system, we believe, the herbs, the spices, the approach, they're both, so similar to naturopathic medicine. It's all similar sciences.
Yes.
And in Ayurvedic medicine, a lot of times when someone comes to me for a private consultation, I'm simultaneously pulling in everything I know from all the systems of medicine, and really from their dosha and understanding their rhythm standpoint, I can address the root cause using Ayurvedic systems. Like, I don't have to. I see what you're saying. You're saying that there is so much diagnostic, and it gives you this beautiful picture of information. But truly, you can tune in from the other side as well and likely get the exact same answer and response.
Yeah,
isn't it fascinating?
It's fascinating. And I also think that, the information and the language has changed, because it's beautiful that patients have more education.
Sure.
They have a ability to actually be advocates for their own health.
Correct.
So, but they may not have the language of Chinese medicine. So if I said you have liver qi stagnation with, fire overacting on, spleen.
Sure.
That doesn't mean anything to them. But in my mind, I'm looking at those things, and it is going to determine what we do to actually get each patient to their health goals. Sure. And I do think that some of these ancient medicines, these wisdom traditions, it helps with being able to communicate what it is that we're seeing, to be able to bring it into the language that people speak.
Sure.
People are on TikTok and Instagram and, and Google. And so they're getting a lot of information.
Sure. They are. And, that's what I realized when I went to India and I studied Ayurveda. I went to India on this journey because I just needed to fix my own gut health. I couldn't understand why I felt like I had no immune system all through my life. And then when I discovered Ayurveda, I was like, wow, you guys have created this entire system of medicine, lifestyle. It works so beautifully. You're using bad marketing. That's what this is. You have not packaged this in a way that we Americans in the West can understand. And I am a born Texan. I need you to speak my language if you want me to absorb what we're going to do here. And so that's why I constantly simplify Ayurveda. I pull each treasure out. I'm like, okay, this is how people will understand it. And thankfully, the language is changing. People have heard circadian rhythm. They're hearing about how our cycle as women per week changes, and we can't just intermittent fast on a hard military line. We have to flex with our cycle. And perimenopause is a huge topic. Menopause is a very big topic right now. Sleep optimization and sleep quality is a real conversation. There's so much out there, you're right, with information. And even as someone, I consider myself pretty educated on health, even I constantly have questions because I'm seeing everything at once. I'm seeing the carnivore diet, the lion diet, versus half my friends are vegan, vegetarian. And you're constantly trying to distill what's the right answer. And that's why I said I had to build my own boardroom around my health, because you're trying to customize with data, but yet we are still a person. Mm-hmm. There's only so much optimizing I can do in a day. Yeah. And sometimes I laugh because I have the protocols that we designed. And I thought of you this week. I was like, wow, it's been 8 weeks. Are you following the protocol? Are you finishing the plan that you committed to? Not quite. No one's perfect. And so in your practice, what do you see a lot of, and how do you kind of educate your patients on not going so overboard? Because I think almost extremism in health is a big problem right now. I see people almost running with more deficiencies because they're so militant and strict with their health. I have a tendency to be that way. I'm like, okay, if you told me X, I'm just going to do X and forget that the bouquet of food and variety is important.
Yeah, that's a great question, big problem. One of the key foundational principles that I believe is that we co-evolved on this earth, and we were meant to eat, and depending on our genealogy, our heritage, our DNA, different things, but we were really meant to eat a variety of food. And as one of my mentors, Paul Pitchford, said, like, we can have a dogma or an idea of how we want to eat, and as long as that works for us, that's great. Sure. But the moment it doesn't, when we're not feeling, as optimal as we would like to, if when we just get our yearly blood work, all the numbers are in the tank, we're not able to put muscle on or stay asleep or all the things that come up, then we have to be willing to kind of change up, like, what we believe is the best thing for us.
Sure.
I really do think that we're meant to eat most things.
Yeah.
And most plants. For some people, I have a lot of vegan patients. And if they're willing to eat a lot, they can get their needs met.
Sure.
But it's harder, it's more challenging, because we have to get that protein in. So we have very good discussions about it, and a lot of my vegan patients cook a lot of food and they ferment and they do beautiful things and they can stay healthy. I think that we have to be really flexible with food. Like, there are times in a protocol with a patient, if I've done, a stool test and maybe a food allergy, food sensitivity test or organic acid profile, where we might be on, I call it like a food as medicine diet, where we might have to take out inflammatory foods. And some of those inflammatory foods may be like healthy for one person, not healthy for another. But my goal is never to have people so limited that they're eating, 20 foods.
Sure.
It's really become, there's such food dogma about all these different diets. Yeah. And I really do think on some level, like a Mediterranean diet, in the sense of you're eating lots of phytonutrients, you're eating foods that are high in omega-3s, and you're eating foods that are just like rich in fiber and all of those things that we need, is really the healthiest. And that doesn't mean everybody can eat every single thing.
Sure.
But we want to be as close to that as possible. And then if it's your child's birthday, you want to be able to eat birthday cake, and it shouldn't like throw you over a cliff.
Sure.
We are really rigid in our ideas about food. And I think that because there's so many little specific diets now, especially compared to when I first started in functional medicine, it was like you had the elimination diet.
Right.
And that was it. And somebody went on it for 28 days. They really did feel better after. We cleaned things up and they introduced things and they found out for themselves what bothered them and what didn't bother them. And then they sort of probably stayed away or limited some of those foods.
Sure.
In 17 years, it's totally different. Like, there is every minutia kind of diet, and I do think can be confusing, and it can be really limiting.
Yeah.
And I think it affects social constructs. You go out to dinner, people don't feel comfortable going out to dinner. I always think of it as like, when I'm eating, are these foods going to be helping me? Like, are they nourishing to me?
Right.
Like, can I choose things that are going to be nourishing to my brain, to my heart, to my stomach, to my muscles? And it doesn't mean that everything I put in my mouth is nourishing, but like those are going to be more of the choices.
Sure. I agree with you that there's so much disordered eating. Just like we have orthorexia, people who over-exercise and are obsessed with it. We have all the other forms of disordered eating, maybe not as serious as anorexia and bulimia, but in their own way are pretty disordered. And I caught that just working with you and with my other team of doctors. I realized I'm a gluten-free vegetarian. And I love health so much that when I hold a line, I'll hold the line. And then I teach how to live an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. And so because all day, all I'm saying is inflammation, take your turmeric, do the things, eat your ginger. Like if you say something all day, then when presented with birthday cake, what are you going to say? I look at it as poison. Mm-hmm. And finally, I was like, how about we bless the food we're going to eat, whatever it may be, and also look at the dogma or the value that I've attributed to things and question whether it's actually good for me. Because since I've been doing functional medicine work on myself, I've never had like an A+ on my blood work. I've always wanted like this one time that I go in and when you guys do my work, you're like, Shivani, you've won. You won the lottery. You're just perfect. No cholesterol. A1C is stunning. Look at that gut. It's just perfect. You wanted everything. And because it never happens, finally I sat down with myself and I said, is your diet the right diet for you? You say all the time people would be great, potentially pescatarian, eating meat, all these things. I don't take away anyone's diet. I say whatever's working for your body is great. Be open-minded to whatever's from the earth is better, all these kinds of things. So I opened my own life up to becoming pescatarian, and I'm 42. That's 42 years of being veg, being open to something. Why? Because logically, if my blood work will always show super low in the omega-3s, if I'm constantly running a panel of deficiencies, in my life, it makes sense to look at that and say, what do I need to change? And does it need to be a big boulder? It might not be small changes anymore. And so have you seen that with patients where it's a big change because it's a philosophical shift? Have you seen that create a marked shift in their health and their life?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if we can really look at, even so with food, yes, with exercise, with work, with sleep, when we look at the things that may not be supporting us or really, really contributing to better health, which most people want better health, especially as we get into our 40s, we get into our 50s, we get into our 60s. We want to really optimize our health. So sometimes, I've had patients who were definitely over-exercisers, and we all know that exercise is good for us.
Right.
But different kinds of exercise are better for different kinds of people, and so being able to have patients be able to look at some of the habits that they have and whether those habits are around food, or movement, or even relationships they have in their life, like those are the things that can move the needle the most.
Sure.
And it's usually just really ingrained habits. Yeah. I really do find that, with exercise, that can really, be and I love exercise. We should be moving our body. We should have muscle on us. We should be having some cardiovascular, exercise. We should have all of it. But if we're exercising, 7 hours a week, right, and we are feeling exhausted and we are getting tendonitis in every joint and we're having menstrual, irregularities and we're having, GI issues, then we have to really investigate that.
Sure.
I was at a seminar a couple months ago, maybe 2 months ago, and they were talking about leaky gut, so intestinal permeability. And they were looking at it from the perspective of two of the major causes of intestinal permeability are overexercise.
Wow.
And alcohol.
Really?
And those are not really things that when we're doing a GI panel on someone,
That's
we're not thinking
what we're
about
thinking
it.
of.
But when we are over-exercising, we're producing a lot of we're producing lots of good things, but we're also producing a lot of inflammatory molecules.
Sure.
And we're increasing our cortisol.
Yeah.
Those things are very relevant to the integrity of the intestinal lining. And so I had, and they had it, there was a lot of science and they had cited some articles and it was really the first time I had seen it in writing,
Sure.
In like where they had journal articles and I was like, huh. And then the alcohol piece, and they were talking about like 7 alcoholic drinks in a week. Like if people were having 7 alcoholic drinks or more in a week, that they were creating a lot of intestinal permeability. Wow. And I mean, that's a lot of people.
Sure.
So those are things that we have to have those discussions about, like, okay, how do we navigate that?
Sure.
Could we cut it down? Could it be Friday and Saturday that you have a drink?
Right.
If somebody's over exercising, like how do we modify that so that they're getting their needs met from an exercise standpoint? Because we do need exercise, but are we overdoing it?
I just had to moderate myself. I just made a very conscious decision to change up how I exercise, and it's like moving a huge lever. When you love to exercise, like to me, exercise is my time where I get to like build my momentum for the day, build my energy for the day, build my happiness, get in the great mood, and then I go to work. And I all of a sudden was like, this is not right for you. You may not work out at this intensity. You can't give all your energy in the tank to this. Then plow through a work day. Then try to show up as a happy, kind mother. Mm-hmm. And then have even 0% left to even say hello to your husband. Nothing is left for wife. I'm just like, hi, you exist. Cool. See you tomorrow, maybe. I don't know. Like I'm out of my mind by the end of the day. So I said, something is not working. And your blood work and gut work is showing something is not working. So you have to start playing with each element and saying what has to change. Yeah. So exercise is a big one because some of us get really addicted to our exercise.
We get, in a stressful world, I always have my patients fill out in their paperwork, I want to know their stress level from their perspective, 0 to 10, 10 being, obviously the highest. And what do you do? What do you do when you're stressed? What relieves your stress?
Sure.
I would say probably 70% of people say exercise. And then some people say wine, some people, and then some people say, music or the beach. And yes, exercise is an incredible antidepressant. It is incredible for anxiety and reducing anxiety. And moderate amounts of exercise really do reduce stress. But if we're in a stressed out body, especially a female body who is either perimenopausal or menopausal, and we're using exercise as the de-stress mechanism, we could find ourselves in a problem, especially if it's, I did, 2 boot camps today, and then I went to a yoga class, and then I went for a run, and then I went for a walk, and, in a day, it's just, the body doesn't know the difference of stressors, there is good exercise stress, but there's also too much.
Right.
And it is a very, very acceptable and way of how we manage stress.
Sure.
And that is definitely something that I have had to really look at in my life. I was definitely an over-exerciser. The more stress, the more exercise. The more classes I would go to, I'd jump on a bike and ride 25 miles. I would, go to a 2-hour yoga class, and then I would go do HIIT training, and my body really spoke to me. it was like, oh, I have this nagging backache and it doesn't matter. I'm just going to like plow through it. And
Sure.
I had to have that conversation with myself. Like, okay, I want to be strong.
Yeah.
I want to be fit. I want to have good cardiovascular health and pulmonary health and good brain health, because we know exercise is good.
Sure.
But use it in a respectful way that is nourishing for our bodies and my body, and not in a sort of frenetic way.
Exactly. And as, women enter these new phases, I keep saying, look, we have to reassess at each decade. And it might not be at the 40, 50 mark, but all of a sudden at 42, I'm having a lot of conversations with myself around, how are you managing things? Is this really the path? Are you really going to drive yourself nuts to scale a company? Like what's the game plan here and what's appropriate? And of course, life happens too along the way in really big ways that shifts our perspective. But as I watch all my friends have this conversation of perimenopause, and then a lot of my friends are a decade ahead of me, they're going right through menopause. I wanted to dive into this topic with you because I love your perspective on it. I love that you use different testing. Like on me, we did the Dutch test and we're diving into where is my estrogen, progesterone, and why and how. What are some of your tips or some of your guidance that you give your clients going through this phase? Because I feel like people never understand, or most people don't understand, that functional medicine can play such a powerful role in how we transition through this time so we can stay our most balanced, joyful, vibrant selves and not suffer so heavily as these transitions come.
Yeah, I love the Dutch test. One of the conversations that I have with all of my patients who are women, all of my female patients, is that we should know how our hormones work in our body, in our particular body. Not just how do hormones work, but each one of us individually has a way in which we make hormones and metabolize hormones. We have different ways that we ration out the raw materials for hormones. So the same raw materials that make estrogen and testosterone and progesterone make cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, and DHEA. And so I think, I had a patient today and I said, if I had my way, everyone around 20-ish, young 20s would get a Dutch test and they would sort of see what is the balance of hormones in my body and what is the balance of stress hormones and what am I doing with my hormones? And then I would say in our mid-40s, early 40s, mid-40s, we would do it again and see, because things change. I always kind of say there are no bad hormones. There's no bad estrogen. There's no bad testosterone. There's no bad progesterone. What we do with our hormones, especially our estrogens and our testosterones, how we utilize those and metabolize those and use them and then get them out of the body becomes the most important thing that we know, that we can know about our hormones. And also, what are we doing in relationship to our adrenals and our adrenal hormones?
Sure.
Are we making too much cortisol? Are we able to metabolize it out? Are we able to get rid of it? Are we constantly in sort of fight or flight and just having that hang out in our system for too long, which really does a lot of damage to the musculoskeletal system, the digestive system that we talked about, our brain, even our blood-brain barrier. So, estrogen metabolism, testosterone metabolism, hormone metabolism are really the things that I think that we need to know. And also, it is actionable. Like we can change those things. We can change those pathways. As women and men as well. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a physician, and he deals in men's health. 20 years ago, the laboratory range levels for testosterone were like 500 to 1400.
Okay. And
now they're like 250 to 900. Like men's health has been affected by stress, by environmental toxins, xenoestrogens. So this isn't just a female problem; it's also a man's problem. But environmental toxins and the more stressful way that we live our life has really impacted our ability to clear out estrogens and clear out toxins. And so we find ourselves in a little bit of a, disconnect from how our body really should have worked or has the capability to work versus like where we actually find ourselves. I would say, I don't know statistics on this, but there is a pretty good likelihood that most young girls who are put on birth control, usually around 14, 15, 16, are not on birth control for birth control, for
Sure.
protection from pregnancy. They're put on birth control because they either have irregular periods, they have acne, or they have really, really painful periods.
Sure.
Those are all check engine lights. Those are all reasons to say, oh, wait a minute.
Right.
Like, what is happening with this system, these systems, and can we intervene right now to make sure that we can solve these issues now? Because
Sure.
when we go on birth control, for those reasons, we are just covering up, we are taking the light bulb out of the check engine light.
Sure.
And just saying, we'll catch up with this later. It doesn't solve the issue. And eventually, at some point, it's going to have to be really kind of addressed. And addressed, again, not just in supplements or medications, but these are things that need to be addressed with lifestyle, with food, with movement, with mindfulness, with meditation. So we come at it from a multitude of ways.
Sure. Yeah, and in there you mentioned cortisol. I do think that women at younger and younger ages are becoming more aware of how optimal health practices, lifestyle practices matter. I think there's still so little awareness over the problems with birth control and taking it for all these other reasons. I myself learned early on, I don't tolerate it well. It's not good for me. It really changes my mental health in a way that I wasn't okay with. So I decided early on, I'm not doing that. But when it comes to cortisol, stress, fight or flight, I'm seeing such a high prevalence of like heart attacks in men, of so much, chronic diseases that are coming later, like the cancers and heart disease, all the different things that I know are rooted in inflammation. But also I think that post-pandemic, there's this higher level of stress, baseline stress that people are carrying that is so troublesome and so problematic. And you and I both know fight or flight, if we live in that all the time, we're not in rest or digest, body's not going to absorb all the good things we're doing. That means that I can be drinking my raw juice and exercising and eating my healthy organic salad consciously every day and giving up the gluten and all the junk, and I'm still not benefiting. And so if you feel like you're an engine running on empty, which is how I feel a lot of the time in my body, I feel like a car that's running at suboptimal gas. Like, when you're like racing for the gas station because you're like, I'm within 5 miles.
Last night.
Exactly.
Because like, on my way home, I wanted to go
exactly.
home.
I always say in the morning. In the morning, you have to get the kids to school. So there's no logic there. But I have felt for years like I was a gas tank that had a hole in it. And that's where I had to learn, I have leaky gut. I have these deficiencies. There's all these things going on. And recently when we met, we talked about high cortisol and stress. We talked about how my estrogen is so high and my progesterone is that of a postmenopausal woman. And so these insights that you get are profound because you're like, whoa, that explains a lot. Intuitively, I was saying for years something was wrong. No one was listening to me. Now, finally, I'm sitting across from someone who will test me to the level I want to be tested, get the answers I need and say, hey, you're not crazy. This data is true. And then also partner with you on what is the gentle, kind journey to fix it. And in my case, I'm pretty pro Eastern solutions and a little bit anti-Western. So any practitioner who works with me really has to negotiate with my mind because I need to be convinced as to what is that path forward because I have a lot of my own opinions. And so when you work with a patient on these things like high cortisol and their different issues, what are some of those building blocks you want to ensure that they get? I know them because I'm your patient, but like you literally had a whole conversation with me on hydration where you were like, Shivani, and I said, I need the lecture. I actually need the lecture. So what are some of those building blocks that you think are forgotten by people?
Well, hydration is so critical. And, as we know, most of our water that we're drinking, at least down here, is bottled water, it's filtered water, it's, not water out of the earth. And so we're already at a deficit when we're drinking water. So people are like, no, I'm drinking water. And I'm like, and you're probably peeing all the time. Every time we pee out electrolytes. You do a urinalysis and they test it, every electrolyte. When we drink water that hasn't had electrolytes put in it, we are drinking water that is sometimes not getting into the cell. So we can have a tendency to be overhydrated but underhydrated, because without those electrolytes, that water doesn't get into the cell. If we are 1% dehydrated, our brain actually shrinks. Like, brain cells actually shrink. Now, they will come back when we hydrate, but that's what we're doing to our brain. And our body runs by the signals of our brain. Like, what our brain is capable of actually looking at and perceiving is how the body's going to run. So hydration is really key. Like, nourishing ourselves. I have, at any given time, we have people who, because intermittent fasting is, has lots of research and there's lots of benefit, but not for every woman. And you spoke of this, you touched on this, at every point in their cycle.
Right.
And if I'm doing a dried urine test on my patient and they're like really, really stressed out and their cortisol is through the roof and they're not metabolizing their cortisol, so it's staying at the tissue level and their hormones are in the tank, I'm not having them do, or even recommending that they do 16-hour fasts. Like, their body is already under too much stress. So we sort of gently try to get like timing of food really dialed in and making sure that people are nourished and making sure that people are getting enough protein, and really importantly, making sure that people are getting enough sleep.
Yeah.
Because sleep becomes secondary to all the things that people want to do. And so I'm really diligent about like, what is your sleep-wake cycle?
Yeah.
What time do you allow yourself to get into that bed and actually go to sleep? And then what time do you get up? Because without sleep, nothing else can happen. Again, from a brain perspective, we have a system in our body called the glymphatic system, which is how the brain cleans itself up. And it only operates at night when we're asleep, and really, give or take a half hour between 10 and 2. And so if we're missing that, I have patients who, they're like, I go to bed at 11:30, 12 at the latest. And I'm like, what's happening between 10 and 12?
Exactly.
Can we have that happen between 8 and 10?
Exactly.
And just like, the closer we can get to that 10 p.m. is going to be so beneficial for how we can manage our life and how we can manage, stress. And I also think that, from an evolutionary standpoint, the way we live our life is so very different than our biology can support.
Sure.
And as women, I always think about like my grandmother at 42 years old, her children were all grown.
Right.
Her children had children. She played bridge I'm not saying that her life was a piece of cake, but she didn't have the everyday stressors. She played bridge. She cooked, lunch and dinner for my grandfather. She pickled, pickles and canned tomatoes. And she did not have a lot of like everyday, every minute responsibilities. And so her menopause was very different because the demands on her were different. Now I have most of my patients are in perimenopause with children at home.
Sure.
They're still raising their children. They're career women. Yep. They have a lot of friends, a lot of, connections and contacts and needs that need to be met. And we still have the same amount of hormones that we had 1,000 years ago. And yet our demands are so much greater. As we spoke about a little bit earlier in the podcast, like the raw materials for hormones come from the same place that our stress hormones come from. And if we're constantly living in this get up and go, we get woken up by our phone. Usually people are getting pinged. They're getting alerts on their phone. Their children need to be fed. They need to get in the office. Their husband, didn't pick up his dry cleaning. They're running through the day. So they're taking all of those resources that could be still making the amount of hormones that we need to support every system in our body. And now they're making stress hormones.
Right.
And so it's not that our culture is wrong. There's no judgment on it. But as I say to my patients, it's how do we best support you in the times that we find ourselves?
Sure.
What are we? Less than 150 years into electricity? When the lights went out, when the sun went down, we went to bed.
Correct.
And now that doesn't happen.
No.
We didn't have phones. We weren't driving and getting an urgent message on we can't even drive.
True.
I mean, I'm almost kind of mad that planes have Wi-Fi now because I used to love to fly because it was the only time nobody can talk to you. They can't call you. They can't email you.
Yeah.
You're on an airplane.
Sure. I loved it when international travel meant no Wi-Fi. Now every hotel has Wi-Fi, but I remember on my honeymoon, we went to St. Lucia. There was no Wi-Fi and there was no cell service.
Yeah.
So it was a vacation.
Totally. Well, and it's funny because I'm older than you. I didn't get a cell phone, I think, till my daughter was 10 years old.
Wow.
So before then, if you didn't call me at home, I did have
on the home
a
line.
answering machine, but when you were out, you were out. When you were on vacation, you were on vacation.
Right.
So it was really, in a very short time, we have become connected at every minute. And also as women, because we tend to be a little bit more wanting to please, we feel that we have to respond.
Sure.
So there's never a time that we're not on.
Correct.
And our physiology, our biology can't support it.
I agree. And I've been thinking a lot about that. I just had 6 weeks of my life where I was traveling every weekend. We did termite treatment, and I'm what you'd call a organic crunchy mom, and I'm practical.
Yeah.
But the organic crunchy took over, and I basically moved the whole house out of the house, and then I moved it back in and had it unpacked. And then we had a big trauma happen in the family, and I'm just wow, what is the new way of life I would design? Because I'm very much into life design. I'm very much into an Ayurvedic blueprint. I'm very much into taking that, understanding my dosha, my circadian rhythm, and then my functional medicine data points, and saying what is right for me in this season, because we're entering the fall season. And so every season I say, okay, what's going to be my approach? How would I like to handle it? And normally I hit the fall season and I'm ready to party. It's Diwali. It is every Indian holiday, every American holiday. And this year I'm looking around and I'm I carry wise woman energy. I always have. I've always carried this grounding, healing hugs kind of energy to me. And how do I tune back into her? Because the pace that I created through the summer is not a sustainable pace. It's that 100 mile an hour down the freeway pace that is not going to hold. And after working with you, and we had I call it those come to Jesus moments. We had a Zoom call, I think a month ago, where you said, listen, your GI map test is showing stress is affecting your gut. I can tell you very clearly now, according to the Dutch test, between everything we've done, stress is impacting you. How would you like to handle that? And I looked at you and I said, I have a company to grow. My supplement company is scaling. I'm not going to have no stress in my life until I win. And that was such an interesting thing that came out of me, because it is how I feel.
Yeah, I know.
I really want to win. But guess what? Winning is multifactorial. Winning is multi-layered. It's multi-dimensional. Winning is, I just want to impact a life every day, or it's, I want to be in 10 million homes. It could be anything. And that's a decision up to me. But what I won't do, as someone who knows Ayurvedic medicine and loves health, I can't imagine looking back and knowing that I sacrificed myself on the path to helping others. And I think as women, that is exactly what we are doing. We are burning the candle at both ends. We are running that engine 100 miles an hour down that freeway on a nearly empty tank, hoping that something will magically save us. And if we don't have the data points so that we're at least plugging the holes,
Yes.
then we're really doing a horrible detriment to ourselves that in the end leads to chronic disease, these wake-up calls, these diagnoses that can be so traumatic, that can be so painful. And then we do have to stop because you hit the wall and now you have to address it.
You're like Roadrunner, like splash.
Exactly.
We can't. One of the analogies, because for whatever reason, car analogies really do fit but it's like if we're going to live our life like we're racing the Indy 500, right? We can't be treating our body like the Chevy Nova that we're driving back and forth to work.
Sure.
Like we have to do all the things because our life does demand some level of really putting the gas pedal on.
Sure.
So, but we have to give ourselves the things that we need to support that lifestyle.
Absolutely. And we have to stop for those pit stops. We have to have a team of engineers. We have to have our tires changed. We have to stop.
They stop every, 10 laps or something?
Yeah.
It's like something.
Yeah,
I don't watch.
It's actually a great analogy.
Yeah.
I'm super into cars and into racing and all these things. So I love car analogies. It makes sense to my brain. Like I do sometimes see my gas tank and think, really, this is an example of you right now.
It's like, you're a Ferrari, Shivani. Treat yourself like a Ferrari.
Exactly. And I, one of my trainers a long time ago, he goes, treat the body like a Maserati. How would you treat it? You would put great fuel in there. You wouldn't put crappy fuel. And so that's where I find working with a practitioner like you so important because you gave me one reminder, hydration with electrolytes. It has changed how my brain works. I was running dehydrated every day, all day. I still have the tendency, but I think of you, and every time I fill a bottle of water, I add a pinch of electrolytes, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to absorb.
I've done this.
Yes.
One little thing.
One thing
is important.
Yeah, one little act per day. But I just want to tell you, I really deeply appreciate you. I walked into your office once years ago, and I saw these walls of supplements, and I was like, this woman knows supplements better than I do. And she's really into fine-tuning the way she approaches each person's health. And then the more I've gotten to know you, the more I appreciate how much you are willing to work with each person to customize a life plan for them that really works.
Thank you. I'm equally impressed by you and all that you do. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Is there any last information you want to share? Will you share your website and how people can find you?
I have a website, Evolve Acupuncture and Wellness, in Delray Beach. And then also Instagram is Evolve Acupuncture Delray.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much
You're
for being
so
on the
welcome.
show.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing so much with us. And I look forward to having you on again.
Terrific. I would love to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for joining me for this episode. Check out our sponsor, Fusionary Formulas, the potent turmeric supplement used by doctors around the U.S. for patients with pain and inflammation. www.fusionaryformulas.com. I'm your host, Dr. Shivani Gupta. For more, visit shivanigupta.com. Subscribe to this podcast in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Click the follow button or subscribe in any of the apps that you use. That's all I've got for you on the Fusionary Health podcast this week. You have the power to transform your health and achieve vibrant health starting today.